In the silence of ancient Qumran, where wind moves through caves carved by time itself, a shepherd boy once found jars sealed for 2,000 years. Inside, wrapped in linen darker than memory, scrolls that were never meant to survive. Among them, a text the early church fathers knew well, a text they quoted, debated, and then quietly removed from the canon of Scripture. The Book of Enoch. We are told it is mythology, apocryphal fiction, the fevered imaginings of ancient scribes trying to explain the unexplainable. Angels who fell, giants who walked the earth. A flood sent to cleanse what had been corrupted. Metaphor, they assure us, symbolic language for spiritual truths. But what if the church fathers didn't remove it because it was false? What if they removed it because it was too specific? 200 beings, names recorded with precision, a location marked on the earth itself, forbidden knowledge passed to humanity, genetics, astronomy, metallurgy, warfare. What if the Book of Enoch is not mythology at all, but eyewitness testimony? What if it preserves the memory of an intervention? Tonight, we begin with a whisper of forbidden history, and by morning, you may never read the ancient world the same way again. Let us turn to the text itself, not as scholars debating theology in sunlit halls, but as listeners in the dark, hearing words that have survived fire, flood, and the careful erasure of councils. The Book of Enoch, First Enoch, as it is sometimes called, to distinguish it from the other texts bearing that ancient name. Chapter 6, verse 1. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied big, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. A simple beginning, the world as it was, humanity spreading across the earth, unaware of what watched from above. Verse 2 continues with the statement that changes everything. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. Not metaphor, not parable, a decision deliberate, collective, but it is verse 3 that removes all ambiguity, that transforms this from myth into something else entirely. And Semjasa, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. A leader with a name expressing fear of consequences. This is the language of decision, of doubt, of beings who understand cause and effect. Verse 4. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. An oath, a binding agreement, the kind of contract that requires witnesses, evidence, memory, and then the location. Verse 5. Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. Upon what? Verse 6 provides the answer that echoes through millennia. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. 200. Not many, not countless. 200. The precision matters. This is inventory, record keeping, and the location, Mount Hermon. A real mountain, one you can visit today, where the borders of 3 nations meet at its snow-covered peak. They named the mountain for what happened there. Hermon, from the Hebrew word herem, meaning oath or ban or that which is set apart. The mountain of the oath. The text even tells us when. In the days of Jared, father of Enoch, whose name in Hebrew means descent, a name that commemorates an arrival. But the text does not stop at arrival. It names them. Chapter 6, verses 7 and 8 list the leaders with the care of a military roster. And these are the names of their leaders. Semjaza, their leader, Arakiel, Ramiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapil, Satarel, Terel, Jomjael, Sariel, 19 names, and the text tells us these commanded 10 others each, yielding the 200. This is not the language of myth. Myths give us archetypes. The hero, the trickster, the wise elder. This is the language of documentation. Chapter 7 brings us to the consequence of that oath. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. The text uses the word defile, not join, not marry, defile, suggesting something was broken at the level of essence. Verse 2, and they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. The cutting of roots, an odd phrase, unless we consider it through another lens. In ancient Sumerian and Akkadian texts, roots and essence were terms used for lineage, for the fundamental nature of a thing, the knowledge of cutting, of altering, of recombining. Genetic terminology in a text thousands of years old. Verse 3 continues, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. The Nephilim, the fallen ones, the giants, 3,000 ells, a cubit measurement that translates to nearly 15 feet tall. Impossible, we are told. Giants of such size could not exist. Yet the text records their height with the same precision it recorded the number of watchers. Verse 4, who consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. A crisis, a collapse, the creations consuming their creators. Chapter 8 shifts from genetics to knowledge. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. Metallurgy, warfare, the technology that would allow humans to reshape the world. Verse 2. And bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids and all kinds of costly stones and all coloring tinctures. Cosmetics, adornment, chemistry, but it is verse 3 that reaches furthest. And Arachiel taught the signs of the earth, and Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun, and Sariel taught the course of the moon. Astronomy, not as spiritual symbolism, but as precise observation, the movements of celestial bodies, the calculations necessary for calendars, agriculture, navigation, the foundations of civilization itself, presented as forbidden knowledge, knowledge that was taught, not discovered gradually over millennia, but transmitted from those who already knew to those who did not. Chapter 9 brings divine response. And the souls of men being dead cried out, and their voice reached heaven. The text describes a judgment, a decision made by what it calls the Holy Ones to intervene, to stop what had been started. Chapter 10 records the sentence, bind the watchers, imprison them in the earth, and cleanse the world of what they created, and destroy all the spirits of the reprobate and the children of the watchers, because they have wronged mankind. The flood, not as random catastrophe, but as purge, a reset of corrupted biology. The text even describes it in those terms. Destroy all wrong from the face of the earth. Not destroy all humanity. Destroy all wrong, all that which should not be. And here we must pause in the darkness and ask the question that matters most. Why is this text so different from the mythology we know? Myths speak in symbols, the hero's journey, the dying god, the sacred marriage. But Enoch speaks in specifications, locations, numbers, names, consequences. It describes technology, genetics, astronomy, with the clarity of someone who witnessed it, or at least witnessed the memory of it. 200 beings, Mount Hermon, forbidden knowledge, genetic corruption, catastrophic flood. These are not the components of legend, they are the components of testimony. And if this is testimony, then everything that follows must be reconsidered. Every ancient text that echoes this story, every megalithic site that defies explanation, every genetic anomaly in the human record. The Book of Enoch was not removed because it was false. It was removed because it was too precise. Because it suggested that beings other than God shaped humanity, and that the knowledge we possess, the civilization we built, did not evolve naturally from cave paintings and flint tools, but was given to us by 200 who descended on a mountain and swore an oath in the days before the flood. But the story does not end with Enoch, because this text hidden for centuries, was not alone in its testimony. The Book of Enoch was removed from the biblical canon in the 4th century. During the Council of Laodicea, the Church Fathers deliberated and decided this text would not be scripture, and the reasons they gave are illuminating. Saint Jerome called it apocryphal, meaning hidden or secret, not false, not invented, but too dangerous for general consumption. Saint Augustine expressed concern that its precise descriptions of angelic rebellion and forbidden knowledge might confuse the faithful, that it suggested a cosmology more complex than the official narrative allowed. Yet earlier church fathers, those closer to the source, held different views. Tertullian, writing in the 2nd century, accepted the Book of Enoch as authentic scripture. He quoted it extensively in his writings, treating it as historical fact. Justin Martyr believed the Watcher story literally, describing the angels who fell through lust for human women. Irenaeus referenced it when discussing the Nephilim. Clement of Alexandria cited it as prophecy. These were not fringe voices, but pillars of early Christianity. They read Enoch and saw not mythology, but memory. So what changed? Why did the Church, centuries later, excise this text from the canon? The answer lies in what the text implies, that beings other than God directly influenced human development, that knowledge and civilization were not gifts from the divine, but from the Watchers, that humanity's corruption was not merely spiritual, but biological, genetic. This created theological problems, questions of free will, of divine sovereignty, of the nature of sin itself, and so the text was removed, relegated to the shadows, but the shadow it cast was long, because fragments of this story survived, scattered across other texts. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, we find the remnant, the compressed echo of what Enoch describes in detail. Listen to the words, translated from Hebrew. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." 4 verses that summarize what Enoch describes in 11 chapters. The sons of God, in Hebrew, Bene Elohim, a term used elsewhere in the Old Testament to describe divine beings, not humans. The Nephilim, from the Hebrew naphal, meaning to fall, the fallen ones, or those who came down. Genesis gives us the outline. Enoch provides the detail, the names, the location, the forbidden teachings, the genetic consequences. And this is not the only corroboration. The Book of Jubilees, another ancient Jewish text, retells the same event, describing how the Watchers descended in the days of Jared, Enoch's father, how they taught humanity and corrupted the bloodlines. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs mentions the Watchers and their offspring. The Book of Giants, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, describes the Nephilim in even greater detail. These giants who consumed all the acquisitions of men, whose violence filled the earth. The Damascus document, another Qumran text, explicitly references the fallen angels and their unions with human women. This was not a fringe belief. This was the dominant understanding. In Second Temple Judaism, the Jewish people of that era, the time of Jesus, read these texts as history. They believed the Watchers were literal beings, that the Nephilim were physical giants, that the flood came as judgment, not just on human sin but on genetic corruption. And this understanding appears in the New Testament itself. In Jude verse 14, we find a direct quote from the Book of Enoch. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them. The text treats Enoch as a prophet, his words as prophecy. Peter's second epistle mentions the angels who sinned, who were cast into Tartarus, held in chains of darkness, the same angels Enoch describes, bound in the earth until the day of judgment. The evidence is woven throughout, if one knows where to look. But there is something else, something that grounds this ancient testimony in physical reality, because Enoch does not just describe what happened. It describes where it happened, and that place still exists, Mount Hermon, rising 9 to 232 feet above sea level, at the southern end of the anti-Lebanon mountain range, straddling the borders of 3 nations: Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, a nexus point, a place where territories meet, where ancient kingdoms converged, where the very air seems thinner, closer to something beyond. The name itself is revealing. In Hebrew, Hermon comes from the root haram, meaning sacred, devoted, or forbidden, but it also means the place of the oath, which aligns precisely with Enoch chapter 6, verse 6. And they were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. The mountain was named for the oath. 200 beings swearing a pact, binding themselves to the act they were about to commit, knowing it was forbidden, knowing there would be consequences, but doing it anyway. And the mountain remembers, at its summit, beneath snow that falls even in summer, are ruins, megalithic structures built with stones that weigh many tons, fitted together with precision, no mortar, no explanation. The Romans called it the Temple of Baal Hermon, but the stonework predates Roman occupation by millennia. Cyclopean blocks, the kind attributed in Greek mythology to giants. Because no human with Bronze Age tool should have been able to quarry, transport, and place them. The site has been sacred for thousands of years. But to whom and for what? At the base of Mount Hermon, near the city of Banished, is another site, a natural cave, from which water once flowed. The Greeks called it the Sanctuary of Pan, a place of worship to the goat-footed god, the Wild One. But the name the locals used was different. They called it the Gates of Hell, or more precisely, the gateway to the underworld, a place where the barrier between worlds was thin, where beings could pass from one realm to another. Jesus himself, according to the Gospel of Matthew, brought his disciples to this exact location, to Caesarea Philippi, at the foot of Mount Hermon, and there, at the gates of hell, he asked them who he was and declared that the gates of Hades would not prevail against his church, standing at the very place where Enoch says the watchers descended, where the oath was sworn, where the corruption began. Coincidence or statement? The stones do not answer, but they remain silent witnesses to something that happened in the deep past, at the place where heaven touched earth. But Mount Hermon is not the only place where this story is told. The Book of Enoch, written perhaps 300 years before Christ, preserves this account in Hebrew and Aramaic. But there are older texts, much older, written in a language that predates Hebrew by more than 1,000 years. Written on clay tablets, in the wedge-shaped script called cuneiform. The language is Sumerian, and the story they tell is almost identical. The Sumerians emerged in southern Mesopotamia in what is now Iraq, around 4500 BCE. They built the first cities, invented writing, created the first law codes. They mapped the heavens with startling accuracy, knew the precession of the equinoxes, and described planets that would not be rediscovered until the age of telescopes. And they wrote extensively about their origins, about where their knowledge came from. They called them the Anunnaki. The name means those who from heaven to earth came, not metaphorically but literally, beings who descended from the sky to the ground. The tablets describe them with precision, not as vague spirits or abstract forces, but as physical entities, with names, with ranks, with roles and responsibilities. Two brothers led them, Enki and Enlil. Enki, the wise one, the geneticist, the craftsman. Enlil, the commander, the lawgiver, the enforcer, The tablets say the Anunnaki came to Earth seeking gold, needed for purposes the texts only hint at. They established mining operations in what is now southern Africa. But the work was hard, endless, and the Anunnaki workers, called the Igigi, eventually rebelled. They laid down their tools and refused to continue, and so Enki proposed a solution. Create a worker, a primitive being that could labor in their place. The Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest texts in human history, describes this moment in detail. Enki took the genetic material, the essence of an existing hominid species, and mixed it with something else. The tablet says, the clay of the earth, mixed with the blood of a god. Modern readers might call this genetic engineering. The result was humanity, Homo sapiens, created as workers, as servants. But the story does not end there. According to the tablets, after many generations, something changed. The Igigi, the lesser Anunnaki, began to notice human women, found them beautiful, and desired them. The tablets describe what happened next with uncomfortable clarity. The Igigi took human wives. Against the will of the council, they intermarried, interbred, and the offspring of these unions were different, larger, stronger, more violent. The tablets called them the mighty ones, the same term that Genesis uses for the Nephilim, the same beings that Enoch describes as the children of the Watchers. Different language, different culture, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, but the same story. Beings from above, descending to earth, interbreeding with humanity, creating hybrid offspring, teaching forbidden knowledge. And then, the flood, the Eridu Genesis. Another Sumerian text describes the council of the gods deciding that humanity had become too numerous, too corrupt, that the genetic experiment had gone wrong, that the bloodlines had been contaminated. Enlil, the commander, decreed that humanity must be wiped clean. A great flood would be sent to purge the earth. But Enki, the creator, warned one man. His name in Sumerian was Ziusudra, in Akkadian, Atrahasis, in Hebrew, Noah, the same flood recorded across cultures. The same survivor, building the same vessel, the same divine reset, following the same corruption. The Sumerian king list, one of the most remarkable documents from the ancient world, divides history into two epochs: before the flood and after. Before the flood, kings reigned for thousands upon thousands of years. One king, Alulim of Eridu, ruled for 28,800 years. Another, Alalgar, for 36,000 years. Impossible lifespans, if these were normal humans. But what if they were not? What if these were the generations when the bloodlines were mixed? When hybrid vigor created beings with extended lifespans? When the genetics of the Anunnaki still ran strong in human veins? The book of Genesis echoes this in a quieter way. Before the flood, the patriarchs lived for centuries. Adam, 930 years. Methuselah, 969 years. After the flood, lifespans drop rapidly. Abraham, 175 years. Moses, 120 years. As if something in the genome was diluting with each generation. The Sumerian tablets were written on clay, baked hard in the sun or in kilns. They survived because clay is nearly indestructible. Thousands of these tablets have been recovered, translated, cataloged. They sit today in museums in London, in Baghdad, in Berlin, and they tell the same story over and over. Not as mythology, but as history, as record, as memory. The scholars call these stories myth, symbolic tales meant to explain the unknown. But the texts themselves do not read like myths. They read like documentation. Lists of names, descriptions of events, precise genealogies, the kind of detail that suggests the writers believed they were recording fact, not inventing stories, but preserving them. So we are left with a pattern. Multiple ancient cultures separated by geography and time. Hebrew, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, all describing the same sequence of events. Beings descending from the sky, genetic mixing with humans, the birth of giants, of hybrid offspring, the teaching of forbidden knowledge, the corruption of the bloodline, and the cataclysmic flood sent to reset the world. Independent accounts, corroborating each other, not through contact but through shared experience, as if they were all remembering the same event, describing the same intervention from different perspectives. The clay tablets sit silent in their cases behind glass, the cuneiform pressed into their surfaces, still crisp after 5,000 years, waiting to be read, waiting to be understood, not as fantasy, but as testimony. And if the testimony is true, if the texts preserve actual history, then the evidence should not only be in words, it should be in the ground, in the bones, in the very structure of what we are. And so we arrive at the bones, the physical evidence that cannot be dismissed as mythology, the remains that speak without words throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Newspapers across America published strange accounts, reports from railroad workers, farmers digging foundations, archaeologists opening burial mounds, discoveries of human skeletons that should not exist, 7 feet tall, 8 feet, 9. Some reports claim 12 feet, 15, even 18. The descriptions were consistent, precise, double rows of teeth, 6 fingers, 6 toes, massive skulls, with bone density far exceeding normal human anatomy. The New York Times, 1902, reported on a find in Ohio. 7 skeletons, each over 7 feet tall, discovered in a burial mound. The Smithsonian dispatched representatives. The bones were collected, cataloged, and transported to Washington. And then they disappeared. Similar reports from Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nevada, Arizona, giant skeletons found and documented, then vanishing from the record. The official explanation, if one is given at all, is that the bones were misidentified. Natural variation, or hoaxes perpetrated by local communities seeking attention. But the pattern persists across decades, across continents. In 1947, in the Euphrates Valley, archaeologists uncovered remains of humans estimated at 14 feet tall. In the 1950s, in southeastern Turkey, leg bones were found that would require a human height of 16 feet. In 2004, in northern India, the army stumbled upon a burial site with dozens of skeletons, all exceeding 12 feet in length. Each discovery followed by silence. The remains, collected by authorities, never displayed, never studied publicly, as if there were a deliberate effort to erase the evidence, to maintain a narrative that such beings never existed. But the Enoch text describes them in detail. The Nephilim, the fallen ones, the giants born of the Watchers, 300 cubits tall. Some translations claim, others say 30 cubits, still 15 feet. Beings of enormous stature, consuming the resources of entire regions. The text says they began to devour humanity when the earth could no longer sustain them. A genetic anomaly, too large, too hungry, unsustainable. And so the flood was sent to cleanse the contamination, to reset. The genetic experiment gone wrong, but the bones are not the only physical evidence. There is something else, written in our very DNA, something that appeared without explanation. In 2008, Russian scientists working in the Denisova cave in Siberia discovered a single finger bone, a fragment less than an inch long. When they sequenced its DNA, they found something unprecedented. A human species, neither Homo sapiens nor Neanderthal, something else entirely. They called them the Denisovans, from that one finger bone and a handful of teeth. An entire ghost population emerged in the data because their DNA is in us, in modern humans living today. Melanesians carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. Southeast Asians, Tibetans, Australian Aboriginals, all carry traces, genetic sequences that provide advantages. The Tibetan adaptation to high altitude comes from Denisovan genes, immune system enhancements from an unknown source. But here is the question that troubles the geneticists. Where are the Denisovan remains? Where are the skeletons, the skulls, the settlements, the tools? One finger bone cannot account for the widespread genetic signature. They interbred with humans across vast geographical ranges for thousands of years, according to the DNA evidence, yet they left almost no physical trace, as if they were somewhere else, not living in caves, not leaving behind the debris of Stone Age existence, but arriving, interbreeding, and departing, a genetic intervention documented in our chromosomes. Then there is the matter of the Boskop skull, discovered in South Africa in 1913, a cranium of extraordinary size. The brain case measured 30% larger than modern humans, an estimated cranial capacity of 1 to 800 cubic centimeters, compared to the modern human average of 1,400. A brain significantly larger, and by implication, potentially more complex. The skull showed advanced features, a more rounded cranium, smaller face, childlike proportions, neoteny, the retention of juvenile characteristics often associated with higher intelligence. Yet the Boskop people have no clear evolutionary precursor. They appear in the fossil record, fully formed, and then they vanish, replaced by modern humans with smaller brains. The question that is rarely asked in academic circles is why? Why would evolution favor a smaller brain? Why would a population with superior cognitive capacity disappear? Unless they did not disappear. Unless they were bred out, absorbed into the larger human population, their genes diluted over generations, but leaving traces, anomalies, individuals with exceptional capacity, the ones we call genius. And then there is the sudden leap. 40,000 years ago, something changed. Anatomically modern human had existed for nearly 200,000 years, using simple tools, living in small groups, leaving little evidence of complex thought. And then, in a window of just a few thousand years, art appears on cave walls across Europe and Africa. Not simple marks, but sophisticated representation of animal, of hunts, of abstract symbols, musical instruments carved from bone, designed to produce specific tones, evidence of astronomical knowledge. Stone circles aligned to celestial events, symbolic thought, language, spirituality, all emerging simultaneously. The academics call this The Upper Paleolithic Revolution, a cognitive explosion with no clear cause. No gradual transition, no intermediate stages, as if someone flipped a switch. The orthodox explanation is that a genetic mutation occurred, perhaps in the structure of the brain, allowing for complex language. But mutations do not spread globally in mere thousands of years, not without contact, without migration, without some vector of transmission, unless the change was introduced not through random chance, but through deliberate intervention, genetic modification that enhanced cognitive capacity across the species. And this is where all the threads converge. The ancient texts describing beings who descended and taught forbidden knowledge. The geographical evidence at Mount Hermon, where those beings allegedly made their oath. The cross-cultural accounts, Sumerian, Hebrew, Babylonian, all describing the same event, and the physical evidence, giant skeletons, ghost DNA, sudden cognitive leaps. Each pillar, standing alone, can be questioned, but together they form a pattern, a coherent narrative that spans cultures, spans millennia. The Book of Enoch is not mythology, it is memory, a preserved account of an actual intervention. 200 beings, whether extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or remnants of a previous advanced civilization, descended to a specific location, Mount Hermon. They took human mates, creating hybrid offspring. The Nephilim, documented in both Enoch and Genesis. They taught forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, astronomy, medicine, writing. The sudden appearance of civilization's building blocks. But the experiment went wrong. The hybrid population, the giants, became unsustainable. The genetic corruption spread beyond control, and so a reset was required, a cataclysm to cleanse the earth. The flood myths, found in over 200 cultures worldwide, Sumerian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, Chinese, Native American, all describing the same deluge. And the geological evidence confirms it. 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas boundary event, a cosmic impact or multiple impacts that ended the Ice Age catastrophically, massive flooding. As ice sheets melted in decades rather than millennia, sea levels rising by 400 feet, coastal civilizations drowned beneath the waves, the survivors retreating inland, carrying only memories of stories of the world before, of the beings who came from the sky, of the knowledge they brought, and of the flood that swept it all away. This is the intervention theory, not fantasy, but a hypothesis built on layered evidence. Ancient texts that read like historical documentation, archaeological sites that matched the textual descriptions, cross-cultural corroboration from independent sources, genetic anomalies that appear without evolutionary precursor, physical remains of giant humans systematically removed from public view, and a global cataclysm, recorded in myth and confirmed in geology. The pattern is undeniable. The question is not whether the evidence exists. The question is whether we are willing to see it, to consider that the story we have been told about human origins is incomplete, that we are not the result of unguided evolution alone, but the inheritors of a designed genome, carrying within us the legacy of those who came before. The Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Elohim, different names, same beings. Their knowledge became our civilization. Their DNA flows in our veins, and perhaps their purpose still echoes in what we build. The night settles over Mount Hermon. The ancient stone still marks the summit, the place of the oath, where 200 beings once descended, where the course of human history was altered forever. The stars, the same stars that watched it all, still turn above, and beneath them the earth remembers in buried texts, in scattered bones, in the spiral of our DNA, the memory of intervention. Sleep now and wonder what else has been hidden, what other truths lie waiting in the forbidden books, in the lost libraries, in the sealed chambers, in the texts they deem too dangerous to preserve. The past is not what we were taught. It is deeper, stranger, more wondrous than the sanitized version allows, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between the known and the forgotten, the truth waits to be remembered. Rest and let the ancient mysteries settle into your dreams, for we are all children of the intervention, carrying within us the echo of something greater, until we meet again in the lost lore. The characters, incidents, and dialogue in this video are dramatized for narrative and entertainment effect. While some events may be inspired by real-life themes, this story is a work of fiction.